You have been raising the alarm about the responsibilities of these tech platforms for some time now, and I know this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but at this point, which side of history do you think these platforms will be on?
It's a great question, actually, Emily, and it is the question they have to answer because we are at an existential point in our society in terms of our democracy. We can see it in the 2020 election and the stories we've just been doing about misinformation in the election, but also in terms of the impact on your kids and my kids and on all of our lives. So this is a very fundamental question that I think the Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, Jack Dorsey's, Tim Cook's, and everyone else have to answer. Which side of history do they want to be on? And how do they shape the next generation of young people, our kids and your kids, but our society? These are profound questions, and that's exactly what the book is about.
Let's start with Facebook. You wrote about Section 230 and holding platforms, tech platforms, accountable. In recent days, we've seen Facebook crack down on Holocaust deniers, on anti-vax ads. They've banned QAnon. Is it enough or too little too late?
Basically, too little too late. You took the words right out of my mouth, Emily. I mean, honestly, these guys participated in the hacking of the 2016 election by the Russian government. Think about that. They actually permitted their platform to be used by a foreign adversary to hack our election, also in 2018. So now when they're belatedly coming out and saying, okay, we're going to ban Holocaust deniers, are you kidding me? They should have done this years ago. But you raised the important question of Section 230. What is the liability for the major tech companies and the social media platforms in particular for misinformation, disinformation, and falsehoods? They have to be held accountable. We're going to have to redo Section 230. And this is a moment of great reckoning that's going to culminate in this election in a few weeks.
So saying they permitted it is different than they failed to prevent it. And I'm sure that's what Facebook would argue in response to your point there. But, what kind of changes are required? I mean, should tech companies be broken up? Do we need government regulation? What a different business model, a subscription business model?
All of the above. All of the above. Clearly, we have major antitrust issues that are going to come to the fore. So these have all been pushed below the radar a little, Emily, not that far. They're emerging. So we're going to clearly have big antitrust issues. In the case of Facebook, we've discussed this before. We would strongly urge a common sense that they be forced to divest themselves of Instagram and WhatsApp. But you're also going to see major liability issues for the content that they're publishing on their platforms. I mean, we're on a channel right now where you have great restrictions about what you're allowed to publish, just like all other cable news platforms do. But the tech industry has no regulation. So we need regulation, we need thoughtful antitrust provisions, and we need a basic public effort and movement, I think, to say to the major tech companies, which side of history do you want to be on? Because your kids are going to judge you and history is watching. And whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, whether it's the other big companies, they're going to have to respond to these questions. And with the election of 2020, all of these issues are going to be on the table.
Now, you and Common Sense have been big drivers of the Stop Hate for Profit campaign. You've got hundreds of advertisers on board to boycott Facebook the month of July. Many of those advertisers have come back, and I'm curious if you think that campaign will actually have long-lasting implications. Are you still talking with advertisers? Do you think there's more boycotts to come? Because if they don't take a stand in that way, for an ongoing period of time, will Facebook get the point?
The great point, Emily. And the truth is this, the belated efforts that you just mentioned from Facebook about Holocaust deniers, et cetera, that's a result of Stop Hate for Profit, period, full stop. We could stop and congratulate ourselves for forcing them to do that. They should have done it years ago, by the way, but they're doing it now because of the Stop Hate for Profit movement and the advertiser boycott. Do we think this is going to continue? Absolutely. I actually think that people across the political spectrum are fed up with some of this stuff. I mean, you even saw Donald Trump last week come out and say that Section 230 should be repealed. It was for different reasons than most people have called for the repeal or overhaul of Section 230. But it reflected the fact that there is a broad assessment among the public on all sides of the political aisle that we need a regulated environment, that we need to treat the tech companies as the publishers that they are. And the key is going to be a thoughtful, common sense regulatory structure. And business has to weigh in that, the tech industry. And you mentioned my friend Mark Benioff, people like Mark Benioff or the folks at Microsoft or Apple. They've been very important in privacy regulation here in California and around the United States. So we're going to need tech leaders to step up too and say, this is what we believe in. I mean, we've had sort of a free-for-all Wild West environment for the past decade or more. That's going to change. The question is, how do we regulate these companies? And as I said again, which side of history will they be on? The public is watching. So are you and my kids.
Now, the consequences, potential consequences, are huge. We have an election at stake. Today, the California Republican Party admitted to placing misleading ballot boxes around the state, and so they would continue to do so. So having accurate information about the election is so critically important. I mean, how concerned are you that this upcoming election, that we are not ready, that this election could be undermined once again?
Well, I mean, yeah, as you said, once again, because Emily, the 2016 election was undermined by our major foreign advocacy, Russia, with the complicity of a certain political party. So am I concerned? Absolutely. One of the biggest critiques the Stop Hate for Profit movement has said about Facebook and Instagram is that they permitted voter suppression. There were a ton of false and misleading efforts aimed at African-American voters, low-income voters, et cetera, trying to basically suppress the vote. As a Stanford con law professor, I'm shocked and outraged that we're worrying about that in 2020, but it's the reality. So here's the fundamental point here is that tech companies need to be part of American democracy. They need to promote fair and good rules for all sides of the aisle. They don't need to take a stance. They just need to do fair and common sense behavior. But we're going to see a major regulatory regime. We're going to be talking this on your very fine show in 2021, Emily, no question, because the stuff has hit the fan, if you will. And the election is at stake. Our democracy is at stake. Our kids' lives are at stake. These are very important issues. And what I tried to do with this book was get some of the smartest people in the world to weigh in on the various aspects. But at the end of the day, it's really up to you and me and our audience to say, this is the kind of society, this is kind of democracy we want. And we all really do want to be on the right side of history. So we need to hold the tech industry accountable so that they will be as well.
I appreciate you censoring your words there, Jim, because as you know, we can't just say whatever we want on cable television.
That's true.
We talk a lot about Facebook. You mentioned Apple, you mentioned Google. Yep. There are other companies where we could lay some blame here. Apple makes a lot of money on in-app purchases and virtual items that you buy in games. There's Google as well, and of course YouTube. What are some of the responsibilities of these other major platforms, or where do you see them shirking those responsibilities?
Well, no, Emily, it's a great question. And it's very important for our audience to remember that the tech industry is not monolithic. For example, when we passed the California Privacy Act in 2018, the landmark law of the land on privacy in the US, we split the tech industry. So Apple, Salesforce, Microsoft came along, and then basically Facebook and Google had to agree at the end of the day. So it's not a monolithic industry. But these are very profound questions about our democratic institutions, about your kids and my kids, and the impact that technology and screen time and content can have on them. These are really, really important questions for all of us to discuss. And they go to the essence of corporate responsibility. They go to the essence of what is the role of our government in a society where we respect freedom of expression, but we also have other norms that matter. And so we are in the middle, and this program is in the middle of an incredibly important discussion about the impact of technology in our society, the specific companies, technology more broadly, and also our kids' future. I mean, what bigger issues do we all face other than who's going to be the next president of the United States? So it's a great time to have this discussion. It's a great time to have Which Side of History Out as a book. And everybody who's listening to this program has a stake in the outcome.